Okay, so we are on Daf Yud Bet Amud Bet. Okay, the truth is we were just finishing off the previous Sugnah. There are two Mishnayot in our Amud. We're going to go through both of them hopefully today. But just before we do that, so the previous Mishnah which we discussed, just to go back, just to give a very, very quick recap. So the Mishnah over there said, right? You remember the Mishnah said that when we have a tree which is on the outskirts of again, not the outskirts of the city itself, but the outskirts of the tchum of the city, because we said at least for the purposes of klita, of providing protection for the Rotzeach, that the tchum is included as well as the city itself. So you have a tree which is on the outskirts of the tchum, and either the trunk of the tree is inside the tchum and the branches are outside, or vice versa. So the Mishnah said, "Hakol holech achar hanof," right? That everything goes by the branches. In other words, our assumption at that point of the Mishnah was lechumra or lekula, which would mean that if the tree itself is inside the tchum of the Yer Miklat, but the branches are outside, so then if the Rotzeach is standing underneath the branches of the tree, then the Goel Adam could not kill him, because even though he's now outside the tchum of the city, it's as if he's inside because he's connected to the exactly opposite of what I'm saying. Just checking you were listening, right? That's we said everything goes by the nof, everything goes by the branches and not the trunk. So our assumption would be as follows. So let's take the easier case first. The trunk is outside the tchum, the branches are within the tchum of the city. If the Rotzeach is then standing by the trunk of the tree, even though he's outside the tchum of the city, the Goel Adam would not be allowed to kill him. Goel Adam would not be allowed to kill him because we say the chumrah, we say we have to treat it as if he's inside the city itself. However, the opposite case, whereby, and this is the problematic, this is going to be the difficult case, because if we say hakol holech achar hanof, we'd have to say the following as well: that if the tree is the trunk is within the tchum of the city, and the branches are outside, if we say everything is hakol holech achar hanof, then we assume just like the branches are outside, then the trunk of the tree, even though it's inside the tchum, we judge it as if it's outside, which means there you would have a situation whereby the Rotzeach is standing within the tchum of the Yer Miklat, and along comes the Goel Adam and kills him because he's by the trunk of the tree. That would be seemingly permitted, right? That would be the case lekula, and that is the case which is very, very strange, which the Gemara is going to question. How can that be? How can we say such a thing? But that is our initial understanding of the Mishnah. So the Gemara offers two terutzim. Terutz number one, I'll just say outside. We won't read through it all again. But terutz number one, because the question was, right? The Mishnah says that hakol holech achar hanof, that is regarding the Yer Miklat. But we have a Mishnah in Maaser Sheni that says when it comes to Maaser Sheni, which has to be eaten within the walls of Yerushalayim, that there, if we have a tree in the same sort of scenario, it's irrelevant where the branches are. It's just irrelevant: are you in the walls or are you beyond the walls? So option number one was to say, well, that opinion in Maaser Sheni is the opinion of Chachamim. But over here regarding the Yer Miklat, this is in fact the opinion not of Chachamim, but of Rabbi Yehuda. We then brought another kasha. We said, okay, we have a contradiction within Maaser Sheni itself, because one Mishnah says that by Maaser Sheni we go by we don't pay attention to where the tree is, we pay attention to where you are. But another Mishnah said both for Maaser Sheni and for the Yer Miklat we go by the branches of the tree. So therefore we said, okay, no, that is still the opinion of that is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Sorry. The first based on the first kasha, we said, well, there's a difference between Maaser Sheni and there's a difference between Yer Miklat. Then we said, no, everything is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, and he says it's the same din regarding the Yer Miklat, regarding Maaser Sheni, that in both cases we go by the branches of the tree. But then the Gemara said, no. Said Rabbi Yehuda only said that lechumra. Right, when it comes to Maaser Sheni, you could say a chumrah in both directions. Because of Maaser Sheni, it's if you're outside the city, outside the walls of Jerusalem, then you cannot eat the fruits, because you can only eat them inside the city. If you're inside the city, then you can no longer redeem the fruits, meaning once the fruits have come within the walls, they cannot be redeemed, they have to be eaten, you can't switch them. So we could say that Rabbi Yehuda says, wherever you are, judge it like the branches of the tree, lechumra. However, in our case, right, in our case of the Yer Miklat, it doesn't work, as I explained at the beginning. It doesn't work to say chumrah in both directions. Meaning, I understand If the tree itself is outside the tchum of the Ir Miklat and the branches are inside, then even though the Rotzech is outside the city, then I say the Goel Adam can't kill him because we say L'chumras if he's inside the city. But where it's the opposite case, whereby the trunk of the tree is inside the tchum and the branches are outside, and the Rotzech is inside the tchum of the Ir Miklat, am I going to say, no, even though he's inside, we say we go by the branches, and therefore the Goel Adam can kill him inside the Ir Miklat? That is not l'chumra, that is l'kula, that does not make sense. So that is the Gemara's kasha. Okay, that is the Gemara's kasha on the steroids of Rabbi Yehuda. And the Gemara then brings two ways to resolve it. Okay, one in the name of Rava and one in the name of Rav Ashi. Okay, but according to both of these answers, we are still saying, we're still keeping out original teretz. In other words, we're still saying that it's Chachamim who say, by Maaser Sheni, that you just go by where it is, and it's Rabbi Yehuda who says we go by the tree. We go by the tree l'chumra, both in the case of the branches of the tree, both in the case of Maaser Sheni and in the case of Ir Miklat. But in order to answer the question that we've posed, we need a further answer. So we're on Daf Yud Bet Amud Bet. We are now. There's a Mishnah about halfway down the Amud. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Seven lines above that Mishnah. You'll see in the middle of the line it says Amar Rava. Okay, so Amar Rava as follows. So answer number one is like this. Amar Rava be'ikaro de kule amalo plegi de lo matzik til. Right, we're dealing with the case of the problematic case where the tree itself is inside the tchum of the Ir Miklat, but the branches are outside. So Rava says like this. Right? If everybody agrees that if the Rotzech is standing by the Ikar, by the trunk of the tree, which is inside the city, that you can't kill him. Okay. Benofo, if on the other hand, he is standing by the branches, so he's standing outside the city, and the Goel Adam could kill him, could shoot arrows or stones at him, and he could kill him in that way. Everybody agrees that also would be, he'd be allowed to do that. What is the machloket here between, in this case, between Rabbi Yehuda and Chachamim? The machloket is whether you can judge whether when you're using the trunk of the tree as a darga, as a step, as a ladder to climb up onto the branches. Okay. Mar savar ave ikaro darga lenofo, or mar savar lo ave ikaro darga lenofo. In other words, do we say, since the trunk of the tree is within the Ir Miklat and the branches of the tree are outside the Ir Miklat, if the Rotzech is using the trunk of the tree to climb up, to get to the branches to kill him, so he's starting inside the Ir Miklat, do we say that is permitted or not, or do we say we go by the branch? Rabbi Yehuda says we judge it as a darga lenofo, meaning we judge it as a step up to the branches, meaning we don't assume, we don't consider that he's in the Ir Miklat, and therefore he's allowed to kill him in this case. And Chachamim say the opposite, say no, they would not. We don't consider it as a step. We consider he's still in the city itself. Okay, so that is teretz number one. That is Rava. Rav Ashi gives maybe a simpler teretz. He says Rav Ashi Amar, my achar hanof, af achar hanof. Right, so Rav Ashi says we just have to change the way we read the Mishnah. Originally, we read the Mishnah, it said that if you have the tree in one place and the branches in another, we said akol olech achar hanof. Everything goes by the branches. Rav Ashi says, don't read it like that. Say af akol olech. What was the language of the Gemara, right? Achar hanof, af achar hanof. Saying everything goes even by the branches. In other words, sometimes it'd be a case where we would be machmir to say that we go by the branches. Not in every case. So the case you asked about, whereby what would be the chumrah? How could it be that if the tree trunk is standing inside the city and the branches are outside? So he says, no, that's not the case Rabbi Yehuda was talking about. In that case, Rabbi Yehuda would agree with Chachamim. He can't kill him. The extra limit is that you'd even go by the branches of the tree in order to say, for example, in the case whereby he's outside the city, because the branches are inside, it's as if he's got the klita, it's as if he's safe in the Ir Miklat. So why does the Mishnah need to come along and tell us that? See Rashi here towards the bottom of the page. not the very long lines in Rashi, the intermediate lines in Rashi, towards the end of those, where it says Rav Ashi Amar Mai Achar Hanof. He says the Kamar Matnitin, the Hacha, that which our Mishnah here says, V'chen Braita Barei Miklat, and also the Braita, which is discussing the Arei Miklat, says Af Achar Hanof. It doesn't mean you always go by the branches. It means you would even go by the branches. Lechumra, Rabbi Yudai, and it is Rabbi Yuda's opinion. V'kula lechumra, and it's only regarding, and it's all talking about saying when do we go by the branches of the tree? We only go by the branches of the tree lechumra. So leinyan maaser kedushanin, and regarding maaser, as we've already explained, as the Gemara said, it goes in both directions. Uleinyan miklat. Regarding miklat, right? Regarding the rotzech, it means even by the branches. The where the main part of the tree, the trunk is inside the city. Where the trunk is outside. And its branches go inside the city. There we say that we judge the trunk of the tree like the branches, l'chumra, meaning even though that is outside, you still consider it as if you're in the city. We don't say there, oh, you're standing where you're standing, and that's the end of it. But where it's the opposite, where the tree itself is inside the miklat and its branches are outside, so then the branches go by the main part of the tree, and he can't kill him if he's just standing by the branches. Umishum tivakule gemara shadina nof betarikar. Since generally speaking, we say that the branches go by the trunk of the tree. It's shechacha lemeimad l'inyan miklat zimnin de shadina nikar. But it needed to tell us that when regarding the miklat, it goes sometimes goes by the trunk, sometimes it goes by the branches. So essentially, that is what Rav Ashi is telling us. That there is an extra chumrah. It's going to chumrah. That's what Rabbi Yudah is telling us. Okay, and that is the second explanation for the Mishnah. So moving on now.
Rabbi Kenigsberg.
Yes.
Are we assuming that all the Arei Miklat were walled cities?
Are we assuming the Arei Miklat were walled cities? I mean, what we're dealing with over here is irrelevant. When we discuss walls in our Mishnah, it's talking specifically about Maser Sheni, where you have the walls of Yerushalayim. But over here, we're not actually talking about the city itself. Meaning, even if there was a wall, we have the Tchum which goes outside, which goes 2,000 amot beyond the city, and we're talking about that boundary.
But how is the boundary defined if there's no wall?
Presumably, there's a marking as to where that area ends. Yeah, not necessarily a wall, but it would need to be clear in terms of where the boundary is.
And surely that would also then apply to the 42 cities of the Levium.
Yeah. Everything we're talking about now with the Arei Miklat applies both to the 6 specific Arei Miklat and the 42. This is going to come up shortly as well. You know, whenever we talk about, we say the Arei Miklat, we'll see it in the next Mishnah. Are we referring to both of those in equal measure? Okay, so now, because we have discussions, what happens if, for example, let's say a Levi kills somebody accidentally, right? A Levi lives in the one of the Arei Leviim, which is also an Ir Miklat. Does he have to go to a different Ir Miklat? How does it work? So says our Mishnah, Harag be'otah ha'ir, a person killed within that city. So what is this case? So let's say a person, he's really having bad luck, right? A person killed somebody by b'shogeg, and then he was exiled into an Ir Miklat, and now in the Ir Miklat in which he now lives, he then killed somebody else b'shogeg. Now what happens to him? Does he have to go? Does he have to leave again? Well, on the one hand, he can't leave, but on the one hand, he has to go into Galut again. By the way, here you see potentially that the inyan of going into Galut is not just to do with the Goel Adam, maybe. It's also got to do with some minion of Kapara, because the Goel Adam can't kill him because he's still he's already in the Ir Miklat. But I guess the question would be, right, let's say a person killed Reuven initially, and now he lives in the Ir Miklat, and now while he's in the Ir Miklat, he kills Shimon. So Reuven's Goel Adam for sure can't do anything to him because he's still in the Ir Miklat that he had to run to. If he doesn't leave, Can Shimon's Goel Adam kill him where he is? So says the Mishnah, Rag be'otah ha'ir, he killed within that city, goleh mishchuna l'shchuna. So he's now exiled from where he is, from that neighborhood, to a different neighborhood within the city. Uben Levi goleh me'ir le'ir. If he is a Levi, interesting why the Gemara has this Ben Levi specifically, but if he is a Levi, then he would go me'ir le'ir. He would have to go now to a different city, because he's not in the city as an Ir Miklat already. He's there just because that's where he lives. So it's never actually provided him with Klita. Says Rashi on the Mishnah, Harag be'otah Rotzeach shegalal Ir Miklat. So you have a murderer who somebody who killed, and he's therefore in the Ir Miklat. V'chazav harag be'otah ir b'shogeg, and he went again b'shogeg, and he killed once again in that city. Golem shchuna l'shchuna. He's exiled from one neighborhood to another. B'toch ha'ir, within the city. Because he can't leave the city in the first place. He can't go out because of the first one. Okay. Uben Levi, who is lives in that city, that's where his residence is. Varag b'shogeg, and he killed by accident. Me'ir le'ir, golem me'ir le'ir. He has to go to a different city. He's allowed to leave the city because he was never exiled there. Okay, so says the Gemara, Tan Rabbanan, V'samti lecha makom. This is the pasuk dealing with the Arei Miklat. It's now going to darshan out. It says V'samti lecha. Kadosh Baruch Hu says to Moshe Rabbeinu, V'samti lecha, I've given to you b'chayecha, meaning while you are alive. V'samti lecha b'chayecha makom, a place mimkomcha, from your place, asher yanoshama. So what does all that mean? What does it mean? Samti lacha makom, that you have a place now where you can go. We know already that Moshe Rabbeinu set aside those 3 Arei Miklat, but they were not collect until after Bnei Israel had finished the years of Kibush v'Chalukah, and set aside the ones in Ever Yarden as well. So what does it mean over here? Samti lacha b'chayecha makom mimkomcha asher yanoshama melamed shayu yisa megalim b'midbar. So it could have happened that in the Midbar, in the 40 years, what happened if somebody killed B'shogeg? Where are they going to go? So there, within the Midbar, they could go into Galut, in the Machaneh Levia. So Mikan Amru, Ben Levi Sharag, Kolemi Pelech LePelech. So from here we see that if you had a Ben Levi who killed, he goes into exile from one Pelech to another Pelech, meaning a different neighborhood within a city. And if he was exiled to his neighborhood, that would absorb him. Okay, we'll see in just a moment exactly what that means. Amar Acha Breder of Ika Maikra. What's the pasuk? It says Ki be'ir miklato yeshev, in his city of refuge he will sit. Ir shekalatato kvar, the city that had already absorbed him. Okay, so we seem to have a little bit of a contradiction over here. The Mishnah taught us that if somebody was already in the Ir Miklat, first of all, and he killed again, so then he goes to a different shchuna within that Ir Miklat. Then we said if there was a Levi who killed, so he has to go to a different city. On the one hand, the Mishnah says he goes to a different city. Then the Gemara tells us that this didn't apply in the Midbar as well, that the Ir Miklat, so to speak, within the Midbar would be the Machaneh Leviah, would be the encampment of the Leviim. And then it says that if you have a Ben Levi you killed, he could go from, right, he goes mipelach lepelach. That sounds like our Mishnah, that he goes from one neighborhood to another. And then it says, but if he went into exile in his neighborhood, then that would give him klita. So what's exactly going on? So let's see Rashi. Rashi says, Gemara, 3 lines from the bottom of the page in Rashi. Kan hiftichu HaKadosh Baruch Hu leMoshe. HaKadosh Baruch Hu promised Moshe, sheyizkeh lemitzvah zo b'chayav shevdil shalosh arim. Yeah, there was a promise he would have this mitzvah in his life, that he would set aside the three cities, right? Even though we know that the mitzvah do not actually apply yet. Makom mimkomcha shteim machaneh leviah koletet. That the encampment of the Leviim would serve as the Ir Miklat. Af Arei Miklat you are a Leviah, and so too later on the Arei Leviah would be Arei Miklat. Pelach is a Medina, is like a state, like a province. Ma'ikra, what is the pasuk? The Pilcho Kolto, that his province or his neighborhood would absorb him. And also in our Mishnah, which says you go from one neighborhood to another, but you're still within the city. You're still in the same Ir Miklat. So therefore it says Ir Miklato. Those words, the Ir Miklato, are superfluous. So it comes to teach us there's a case where the Ir Miklat, which already was an Ir Miklat for somebody, serves as his Ir Miklat again. So the Rambam over here, let me just read to you very quickly, very, very short halacha in the Rambam. He explains the following. This is the Rambam Melchot Rotzeach, Perek Zayin halacha Hey. He says, Rotzeach sharag bishkaga be'ir miklato, goleba mishchona leshchona ve'no yotze min ha'ir. He says that a Rotzeach who killed b'shogeg within the Ir Miklat, so he goes from one neighborhood to another, he never leaves the city. Uben levi sharag b'mdinato, golel lemdina acheret me'alei haleviim, and a Levi who kills in his city, right? He goes to goes to another one of the Arei Leviim. Lefi shekulan kotot kmo shitbaer. Since all of them provide klita. V'im harag chutz me'arei Leviim ubarach leiro harei ze koto. Says the Rambam, if he killed outside of the Arei Leviim. So the way he understands this case is that if somebody was right, he was outside of his city, and that's where the murder took place. Then then if he goes back to where it is, where he lives, then that would provide for him klita. So very interesting. What we see here from the Rambam is that the galut is not necessarily from where the person lives. The galut is from where the murder took place. So the person was out at work or whatever it was. He was outside of his city. That is considered. It's now considered galut that he goes back. It's for the Levi that he goes back into his city. That would provide him with his klita. Aruch LaNer also discusses over here. Let me put it up on screen for you. One moment. Okay, so the Aruch LaNer, you can see here in the middle, says the following. It goes like this. He says, "Hinei nistapakti, mi she'eno dar be'ir miklat, rak shelashato ba lesham la'ezet tzorech." So this is sort of the opposite case. He says somebody who does not live in the Ir Miklat, so he's not. This is not necessarily the case of the Ben Levi, or maybe it is. He goes to a different city, but he says rak shelashato ba lesham la'ezet tzorech. So somebody comes to the Ir Miklat for some purpose, right? These were cities, they function, they may come visit somebody, I don't know what it was. The harag sham b'shogeg im ha'ir kalatato. So what would happen if somebody was visiting in the Ir Miklat, and while he was there, he killed b'shogeg? Do we then say that the Ir is kolet? Im nomar kevan shegala me'iro shaya darba nechshav ze legalot. On the one hand, we could say, well, he's not in the place where he lives, and therefore this is galot. Or do we require that specifically he needs to go into galut from the place where the murder took place, which is what it sounds like from the Rambam. Venerali lefi mashpresha Rambam over here im gila lepilcho pilcho koto. Shapirush, the way the Rambam here understands the Braita is that im harag ben Levi chutz meiro v'gala leiro iro koto, that if a Ben Levi killed, he was outside of his city when it took place, and he went back to the city where he lives. That is considered is miklat. Even though he's now gone into exile, not from the place where he lived, but from the place where the killing took place. Nonetheless, you see, in that sense, this is galut from the place where he killed. This is considered galut. It's only when this is the place where he lives and it's where the killing took place that he would need to leave. That the main factor of galut is the place where the killing took place and not necessarily the place where he lives. Now again, if it's not a Levi, if it's a person who lives not in one of the Arei Leviah, or the whole question is irrelevant, because where he lives is not an Ir Miklat. So that's why the question only comes up here. But nonetheless, he says, "Im kenu adin benidon lefanenu, so kam ken liglot me'ir miklat sharag ba le'ir miklat acher." So says the Aruch LaNer, that's his conclusion. If somebody happened to be in the Ir Miklat, and that's where he killed somebody, he would have to run away to another Ir Miklat. So also understand slightly differently the Baraita, but let us move on to the next Mishnah now, which says as following, the bottom of the page. Kayotzebo, similarly, Rotzeach shegala le'ir miklato, v'ratzu anshe ha'ir lechabdo. Okay, so a Rotzeach who a person went off to the Ir Miklat, v'ratzu anshe ha'ir lechabdo. They wanted to, he was a chashuv a person, they wanted to give him mechubah, they wanted to give him shlishi, they want to give him maftir, right? He has to say, Yomar lahem rotzeach, meaning they don't know that he's come because he's a rotzeach, they think he's just come to the city, and they want to give him honor. He has to say, no, I'm a rotzeach, and he has to reject that honor. He's give the maftir to somebody else. They say, nonetheless, we still want to give you this honor. Yekabel mehen. We learn from the pasuk to zed dvar harotzeach. Once he's had his dvar, once he's spoken, that's enough. And if they still want to give him that kavod, they still can give it to him. So interesting. The implication of the Mishnah, is that he has to tell them, but he only has to tell them once. He only has to refuse once. You know, there's a Gemara in Brachot, and it's brought down to Halakha in the Shulchan Aruch. Gabaim do not like this Gemara. It says that you ask a person to be a chazan, or you ask a person, right? He has to reject. He has to say no. And you have to ask him again, and you have to only 3 times, right? The first time, the Gemara says, the person shouldn't be too reluctant, but also shouldn't be too quick to accept it. So the first time you have to say no. The second time you start getting ready to get before the Amud, and the third time you say yes. So the Gabbai has to push a little bit. If somebody is the regular chazan and such, he doesn't have to do that. He can just go up. But there we say 3 times. Over here, it's just once. Okay. Now carrying on with the Mishnah, Daf Yud Gimel, Amud Aleph, the top of the next daf. So it says, Ma'alim ha'yushchal ha'leviim, divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Meir omer lo yumalin la'n schar. Okay. Do you have to pay rent in the Ir Miklat? Machloket Tanaim. According to Rabbi Yehuda, you have to pay schar. You have to pay rent to the Leviim. According to Rabbi Meir, you don't. Now this goes back to Henry's point. Are we talking about specifically the Arei Leviim, or are we talking about the 6 Arei Miklat? The Gemara is going to discuss that. It's going to be a machloket. But wherever it is we're talking about, Rabbi Yehuda says you pay schar, Rabbi Meir says you don't pay schar. What schar exactly is it, and who are you paying? So Rashi says Ma'alim hayu arim schar laleviim sherotzrim sochrim mehem et batei adira. So Rashi says who is paying the Leviim, meaning the people in the city. It could be people in the city who live there. They are paying the rent to the Leviim, and the rotzrim essentially are renting from them. Tosfot says, "Ma'alim hayu schar laleviim perush rotzrim habeim v'dalim sham tzrichim la'alot mas ve'arnona laleviim." Arnona is not something new. It wasn't invented by Eretz Yerushalayim. It goes all the way back. But Tosfot understands that no, it's the rotzrim are paying directly to the Leviim. What are they paying? Not necessarily rent. They're paying council tax. They're paying arnona. Okay. But so that is the machloket Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. And then we have another very interesting machloket in the Mishnah, which says what happens at the end of the day when, let's say, the Kohen Gadol dies and the person comes back from the Ir Miklat, does he return to his original status? The Chozer l'Isralah shayaba divrei Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says he goes back to his former position. Rabbi Yehuda omer lo haya chozer l'Isralah shayabo. Rabbi Yehuda says no, he doesn't. He doesn't go back to where he was. So says Rashi, second line at the top of the page, Chozer l'Isralah shayaba im haya nasi or rosh beit av. If he was the nasi or the head of the beit din. Right, he goes back to his position when the Kohen Gadol dies. That is Rabbi Meir's view. Rabbi Yehuda says no, he doesn't. Okay, and we know this is a sugya again, which is very relevant. Okay, not regarding rotzchim in our days, but all sorts of cases whereby a person loses their position for whatever reason, or once a person starts and has a certain position, has a certain tafkid, are you allowed to remove the person from there? This is discussed in the poskim. It's discussed about chazanim. It's discussed about rabbanim. It's discussed about all sorts of things. And so the question is, do we learn it from from the case of the Rotzeach or not. Rabbi Yehuda over here says, Rabbi Meir says, we go by the default position, which is that a person goes back. Rabbi Yehuda says he doesn't go back. Why? Maybe we say once it happened to a person, even if he was the Nasi or whatever it was, if this killing, this Ritzicha b'shogeg happened to him, maybe that is a sign from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He's no longer fitting to go back into that position where he was, and therefore could we extrapolate from that into other cases? Not necessarily. We've already seen an example of this, whereby the Kohen Gadol. Right, we spoke about which Kohen Gadol. We saw there could be two. The Gemara, the Mishnah in Yoma, which tells us that you set aside a second Kohen Gadol, right, in case something happens to the first Kohen Gadol, some sort of ones comes, he has some sort of tum'ah, he's not able to serve. So we said that somebody else comes and serves as the Kohen Gadol in his place. Over there, everybody agrees. There's no question that once that reason has passed, that first Kohen Gadol can come back into his place. But would we say the same thing regarding the Rotzeach? Right? What happened? Essentially, this is the question Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda are asking. Well, if the Rotzeach was a Kohen Gadol, okay, that wouldn't apply because he could only leave when the Kohen Gadol died, which would be him. But if he was in any other position, would he come back and would he retain that srara? Rabbi Meir says yes. Rabbi Yehuda says no. Okay, so says the Gemara Marav Kahana Machloket b'shesh. So regarding the previous machloket about paying rent, do they have to pay to the Leviim? Rabbi Yehuda says yes, and Rabbi Meir says no. Says Rav Kahana in the Gemara, this is only a machloket regarding those 6 cities. The Mar Savar lachem liklita. Umar Savar lachem lechol tzorkechem. Right? What does it mean? The pasuk says, the pasuk tells us, "Vayu lachem alim lemiklat." These cities will be for you. Right? What does it mean? Lachem. So one opinion is that lachem means liklita. They're there for you to run away to save you from the goel adam. The other opinion is that no, lachem means the kol tzorkechem, for everything. We've already seen that everything should be provided for you. So Rabbi Meir says everything has to be provided. They don't pay schar. Rabbi Yehuda says no, they have to pay schar. But that's in those 6 cities. However, aval b'arbim v'shtayim in the 42 arei leviim divrei hakol hayu malin lahem sachar. According to everybody, there you would have to pay rent. So interesting. You remember a while back we saw the Gemara discuss the difference between the 6 cities and the arei leviim. Said the Gemara over there said what was the difference? The difference was that the 6 arei miklat give you klita, whether it was midat shalom midat, right? For whatever reason the person realized or person didn't realize, these are going to be bona fide arei miklat. Whereas the 42 arei leviim, it's only if you went with the intention of getting klita that it protects you from the goel adam. That was one difference. Here we see another difference according to the baseless machloket between Rav Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. Well, according to this opinion, again, this is the first explanation of the machloket. This is Rav Kahana's view that whether it's Rabbi Meir or Rabbi Yehuda in these 42 cities, they would have to pay. Amar le Rava. So Rava disagrees with Rav Kahana as to what the machloket is. He says no. When the pasuk says lachem, lachem means lekol tzorchechem. It means according to everything, meaning according to everybody in the 6 cities, you don't have to pay, right? And there everything is provided for the rotzchem. Ela marava machloket b'arbim v'shtayim demar savar v'lehem titnu ki hanach leklita. Umar savar v'lehem titnu ki hanach ma'anach lekol tzorchechem afanach nami lekol tzorchechem. In other words, that the pasuk says regarding the arei leviim, right? That et harim asher titnu leviim. You see the side, the pasuk is Bamidbar Lamed Hey, pasuk Vav. Et harim asher titnu leviim, et shesh arei miklat asher titnu lanus shama rotzeach. Right, so you have the cities which are given to the Leviim, and you have the 6 arei miklat. And then the pasuk says, "Valehem titnu arba'im u'shtayim ir." You'll set aside the 6 cities, and together with them, you'll place these 42 arei Leviim. So how far does the comparison go? One opinion says Valehem titnu says again back in the Gemara. Back in the Gemara, about 8 lines down from the page, it says, Ela marava machloket ba'arbim v'shtayim, demar sava v'alehem titnu ki hanach leklita. What does it mean you add these 42 cities? You'll add them on for the fact that they also provide klita. that they are also arei miklat, and that's where the comparison ends. But Mansavar v'lehem titnu ki anach, you'll add these just like those. Ma hanach lekol tzorchechem afaninami lekol tzorchechem. Just like those are for all of their needs, so too these will be for all of their needs. In other words, according to that, you would not have to. According to that, you would not have to pay there either. Aval bashesh, continues the Gemara, in the 6 arei miklat, divrei hakol lo hayu ma'alin lahem schar. According to everybody, you would not have to pay them. You don't have to pay them schar dirah. So we have a machloket Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, and we have a machloket Rav Kahana and Rava how to explain the machloket, or really about which case Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda were arguing. Rabbi Yehuda says you would have to pay schar to the Leviim. Rabbi Meir says you wouldn't. So what are they talking about? Rav Kahana says they are talking about, their argument is within the 6 arei miklat, but in the 42 arei miklat, according to everybody, you would have to pay. That is Rav Kahana's understanding. Rava's understanding is the opposite. Rava says, no, in the 6 arei miklat, according to everybody, you would not have to pay. But in the 42 arei leviim, that is machloket whether you have to pay or not. And so that is maybe why earlier on, when the Gemara tells us the difference between the 6 arei miklat versus the arei leviim, it does not include this, because this difference would only be according to one opinion. According to, there is an opinion. According to Rava's understanding, according to Rabbi Meir, then there wouldn't be any difference. And according to Rav Kahana's opinion, according to Rabbi Yehuda, there wouldn't be any difference between those two cities. And so the Gemara over there is just telling us the differences which are agreed by everybody. Okay, then the second machloket which we saw in the Mishnah was regarding if he goes back to the Srara that he had beforehand. So says the Gemara, Chozer l'Srara shayaba, Tanu Rabbanan, v'shav el mishpachto ve'al achuzat avotav. Ve'al achuzat avotav yashuv. Okay, that pasuk in Parshat Bahar, that is not talking about arei miklat. That is talking about what happens in the what happens with slaves, etc., in the Yovel Year, right? But it says v'yatza me'amecha hu v'anav imo v'shav el mishpachto ve'al achuzat avotav yashuv. When you have in the Shemitah year or in a Yovel Year, says Rashi al mishpachto of Yah. He says be'eved ivriktiv k'shetzei chofshi b'sheshu v'yovel. When Eved Ivri goes free, he goes back to what he had before, right? Shava mishpachto ve'achuzat avotav yashuv. Lemishpachto hu shav, ve'eino shav lemashech ziku avotav. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Meir omer afu shav lemashech ziku avotav. El achuzat avotav kavotav. Right? The machloket, between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda is what does he go precisely? What is it that he goes back to, right? Rabbi Yehuda said, the pasuk said, "V'shav el mishpachto ve'al achuzat avotav yashuv." He goes back to his family, and he goes back to the achuzah of his fathers. So, right, lemishpachto shav. He goes back now to what his family has, right? Ve'eino shav lemashech ziku avotav. He does not go back to what they held the mashech ziku avotav, meaning go back to that position that he had, that they had necessarily. He doesn't go back and inherit that position, right, now that he's been a slave. Those are the words of Rabbi Yehuda, right? Rashi says over here, shechzuku avotav lemashech ziku avotav l'srara. Going back to that position. There's the word. He just goes back to his land, but he doesn't go back to that. That is Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Meir omer afu shav lemashech ziku avotav. No, he goes back. He goes back to that as well. El achuzat avotav ke avotav. Right. He goes back to the achuzah, and he goes back to just as the position that they had. He goes back and inherits that. And says Rabbi Meir, so too v'chen bagoleh. So too, when he goes into the Miklat, Kshuomer Yashuv, when the pasuk says he will return, Rabot Rotzach, to include the case of the Rotzach as well. So my v'chen bagoleh, my v'chen bagoleh. What does that mean? Also to include the case of the goleh, the one is extra. Kedetanya, we have a braita. Yashuv Rotzach el eretz achozato. Again, we see this machloket, right? Yeshuv harotzech le'eretz achuzato, le'eretz achuzato ye'ushav, ve'eino shav lema shechziku avotav. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says he just goes back to his land that they had, but he doesn't go back to inherit that position. Rabbi Meir Omer afu shav lema shechziku avotav. Rabbi Meir says too, he goes back to that position, goes back to that shara. Gemar shiva shiva me'atam. We learn out as a gzera shava of the word shiva, shav. Just like, in other words, we had one braita which we brought the machloket Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda that was regarding the Eved Ivri, and then we say v'chein bagoleh, the same case, the same machloket that Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir have by Eved Ivri. They have the same arguments regarding when it comes back from the Yer Miklat and from the fact that it says shav. Right, Yeshuva, it's the same word, and therefore we have a Gzera Shava to tell us that it's the same, that it's going to be the same thing in both cases. And with that, we say Hadron Alach Elu HaGolin. That concludes the second parak of Masechet Makkot. Yeshar koach to everybody. Next week, so we're about halfway through the Masechet. Next week we start the third parak. Finally, Elohein Elokin, which actually starts talking about Makkot.
Finally.
Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Just one question. I mean, how did they expect the Rotzech to be able to live if the local council didn't give him a stipend or something like that? How did they expect him to live? I mean, if you went into one of the Arei Miklot, let's say he was a blacksmith, could he have set up a new blacksmith place there? I mean, obviously he didn't know if the Kohen Gadol was going to die the next day or in 10 years' time. He didn't know. So would he be able to set up his business, so to speak?
Right. Well, that's good. Well, that's why it seems to be the majority of you say that he's not required. That's what we've already said, where it says v'chai. You have to provide for him everything that he can, that he needs to survive. And there is, right, of the four ways of reading the Mishnah, as we've seen, 3 out of the 4 would say that no, he's not required to do that. If we say he is, so presumably there would have to be a way for him to make a
living
there. Yeah.
And who pays for his family are not with him. His family is still back wherever.
Yeah. So I don't know. So if he can't, then I suppose Beit Din would have to provide for him.
Okay.
That view. Okay.
Well, have a good day.
Yes, of course.
Have a great day, everyone.